Hello everybody and welcome to another video. And this week, instead of me going out and about with my camera and doing all sorts of wonderful and weird photos, well, weird, I thought I would take this opportunity to give you my appraisal of the wonderful Olympus OM-1 film camera, not the digital version, from 1972. My particular example, which I purchased very recently, actually comes from 1979, but I'll go into all the sort of models and modifications that they made when I give you a closer look at the camera itself. But why would I pick the Olympus OM-1 to give you an appraisal of? When I was in photographic retail, I was invited to just two camera launches. One was the Polaroid SX70, also I think from 1972, and funnily enough that was held in the Adelphi Hotel here in Liverpool. And then the other launch that I was invited to was the Olympus OM-1. The Olympus OM-1 is, in my opinion, overlooked and underrated. Now, it was introduced at a time when 35mm film SLRs were at their absolute peak. Nikon had already bought out the world famous Nikon F, and Canon competed against that with their F1 and new F1, which is a slightly updated version of the original. So when Olympus were looking to maximise sales of 35mm cameras, they had already got a world beater with the Pen half-frame 35mm SLR camera. If you hadn't seen that, it's unique and it's well worth checking on the internet. There's plenty of information out there about the half-frame Olympus cameras. But to get into the pro grade, or certainly prosumer grade of 35mm SLR, then they realised they had to do something quite revolutionary. Mr. Maitani, their designer at Olympus, took 5 years to actually bring this camera to market. And there's an interesting little aside here. It should have been launched in about 1971, a year earlier, but because they had technical difficulties in production, they came up with a stopgap camera, which was the Olympus FTL, which again is fairly unique. It was a pretty boring looking 35mm SLR, like any other really of the time. It used M42 Pentax screw mount, but it was adapted so that you could do full aperture metering with it. It had a interlock on the lens mount. I think I've got some photos I can put up for you to see. And that was really only on the market for 12 or 18 months, and it was a stopgap until the OM-1 was ready for launch. And of course you probably are all well aware of the story that when it was first brought to market, it was called the M1, and Leica objected to that because of their M range of rangefinder cameras, so it was then changed to become the OM-1 as we now know it. Anyway, that's enough waffle. Let me give you some close-up views of this and explain its features and idiosyncrasies, because it does have a few, as well as its fantastic benefits. So we'll put it on the table and give you a good close-up of it. So here we are, the Olympus OM-1 film SLR from 1972. My example that you're looking at here comes from 1979. As a company, Olympus started out making microscopes in 1919, 1920. No cameras, but of course their medical side, microscopy and endoscopy units, are in use all over the world to this day. They still make some absolutely amazing medical equipment. and I've been on the receiving end of it fairly recently. That's a different story. What was the intention in designing it? Well, Yoshihisa Maitani-san, who designed this, really wanted something to do the job of a certainly semi-professional, if not professional, SLR, but in a smaller, more compact and lighter package. So he's changed a few of the controls around. The lenses that he produced to go with this are also quite a bit smaller than the competition. So the main advantage was twofold. It's smaller than, for example, the Nikon F2, and definitely smaller than the Canon F1. The F1 was launched in 71 and the F2 was launched in 72. But they were substantially bigger and heavier than the OM-1 that we're talking about today. So that was his ethos. Have a lot of the features that the big boys had, if you like, but in a smaller, lighter package. Now, to do that, he had to make a few changes to the layout, as many people expected to find on a film SLR. I'm just going to turn it round so you can see it as if you were using it. The basic controls are very similar. You've got the wind-on lever here, plastic tip. You can inch it. It's lovely and smooth, by the way. Great action. That sounded a bit of a clunk because I got it pressed down on the table. That's better. You have on the opposite end of the camera your fold-out rewind crank, all very straightforward. We have shutter release button, which is threaded for the conventional tapered releases that you could use in those days. Main on-off switch on the top plate. It's a completely manual camera with the exception of the metering, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. It has a hot shoe on the top, although they were not fixed, as was the case with many SLRs of the day. Mr. Maitani decided that he would make it removable so that you could cut down even more on the bulk of the camera, if you like. So it has specific contacts in the base of the hot shoe. This is a hot shoe 4, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a while. A lot of these got broken over the years because they are plastic. It's a plastic mount with a metal hot shoe on it, obviously. But I was fortunate enough getting mine that it has it already fitted. Now, the other big dial on the top, which of course for conventional SLRs would have been a shutter speed dial, is actually the speed dial, the ASA rating for your film. With it's lockable, and the release for it is here, tucked down between the wind-on lever and the release mechanism, and you can choose film speeds from, where are we, 25 ASA up to 1600. Now, the original OM-1, you may notice this is badged as being an OM-1N. The original OM-1 was simply badged as being that, and you can tell them, apart from that marking on the top plate, you can tell them by looking at the base. Now, some were converted, but basically the original OM-1 did not have these two electrical contacts on the base, and they did not have this smaller removable cover here. They just had the cover there for the old PX625 silver oxide battery for the meter. Of course, they all had standard tripod bush. Now, some OM-1 originals were converted. Olympus offered that as a facility, so just be aware of that. You may buy an OM-1 body. If it has this cover here and the electrical contacts, then you know it's been converted at some stage. On the front of the camera we have got a self-timer, easy to activate, works perfectly, no issues with this on mine. As usual, around about a 10-second delay. And also on the front of the camera you have the film rewind release. This is the release to unlock the take-up spool inside the camera. So again, this is completely different to more conventional layout where you would find that as a button on the base of the camera. Might sound like a small thing, but if you've got this mounted on a tripod and you want to change your film quickly, it's great having that. Don't have to remove the camera from the tripod. I think it's a really good but small addition to the layout. On the side of the lens mount we have this here, which is a mirror lockup. Most useful facility to have. And on the other side of the lens mount you've got your flash synchronization socket, which is FP or X, so focal plane bulbs or X for electronic flash, obviously. And the biggest thing, the biggest difference, you've got the film speed rating dial on the top plate. So where is the shutter speed dial? And that is around the lens. And it's changed by gripping two of these little sort of grips on the side. Speeds run from 1/1000th down to a second with bulb exposure as well. The only other camera that I can remember which had a similar layout was the older Nicomat, the Nicomat FT and FTN type cameras. So it wasn't unique, but it was certainly a change from the norm, if you like. And all of the Olympus OM lenses have the aperture ring at the front. The back of the camera, very, very plain. You've got really quite a nice little eyepiece there, relatively large, and something which I would recommend everybody to think about if they're looking for a 35mm film SLR of this sort of era, is to think about the viewfinder image, because one of the main selling points, apart from its size and weight, the main selling point of the Olympus OM system was how bright the viewfinder is. Now, it is very bright. Maitani fitted it with a large mirror, which hopefully you can see in there. And the focusing screens were incredibly good, which ended up giving you a very, very bright viewfinder image. So focusing with these is a bit of a doddle, I'll be honest with you. Let me put the lens back on. So far, what have we discovered? It's a bit smaller than the opposition, it's a bit lighter, and to get that sort of those features, then it had to be, the mechanics had to be changed around slightly, and the other main benefit is that bright viewfinder. Now, that's all well and good for a advanced amateur's camera, but pretty soon after they launched it, they decided that that wasn't quite good enough. Again, it might have been down to production delays, I don't know. But the original OM-1 was later badged, as this one is down here, as the OM-1MD, which stands for motor drive. And that's where the second removable cover comes in on the bottom of the camera. That's where the dog connection engages between the drive unit and the camera, and that's what these electrical connections are for down here. Now, for amateur use, Olympus offered the Winder 1, which simply advanced the film frame by frame. So it saved you having to do that all the time. Oh my goodness, isn't it hard doing that? But the Winder 1 was, I guess, more than a novelty. It certainly took a little bit of the strain, but it just advanced the film frame by frame. And then they brought out the motor drive 1, which would enable you to do relatively high speed action shots, continuous shooting. They also brought out a 250 exposure back for it, and so things moved on. And the other thing with the OM-1N, the other upgrade, was the fact that they changed slightly the design of the plastic on the lever advance, and they also put, wait for it, a flash ready lamp in the viewfinder. I suppose one thing I could level at this is the fact that the viewfinder is very, very basic. There is no indication of shutter speed or aperture in the viewfinder. You simply get a needle which you center between a plus and a minus symbol. I'll put an image up for you to have a look at. So it's very, very basic, the viewfinder, but it is lovely and bright. Metering is conventional center weighted, by the way, for those of you that have an interest in that technical side of the metering. Okay, does it have a lens stop down? Yes, it does. Depth of field preview, but it is fitted on the lenses rather than on the body. Okay, so when you buy any OM system lens, then they all come with a depth of field or lens stop down button on the side. I'm not going to talk about the later models than this, the OM-2, 3, 4, etc. They were improvements over this, and they became much more electronic, of course, as did every other camera through the late 70s and into the 80s before autofocusing took over the world. But the other thing which Maitani decided to offer, because it was a feature enabled first of all with the Nikon F back in the 60s and carried on with the F2 and Canon's F1, was the ability to change the focusing screens. Now, with the Nikon F2, the metering was done by fitting a separate head to the camera. With the Canon F1, that was inbuilt inside the body. So both those cameras had interchangeable pentaprisms. The Nikon, if you wanted through the lens metering, you had to have it with a photomic head. With the Canon, it was built into the body. So the idea with those two manufacturers was that you could take the pentaprism off, replace it with a different one, and also insert a different focusing screen. Now, Maitani decided, no, I don't want to take off the pentaprism because that's going to mess up the design of the camera. What he did was to allow it to be changed from inside the mirror box of the camera. I'm going to do this back to front, but I need to be careful. There's a little tiny clip at the top here. I'm going to have to look to see what I'm doing because I don't want to damage it. Okay, I'm hoping you can see that in there. The focusing screen has now flipped down, and each one, I shouldn't be doing this with my fingers, but if I'm very careful, I'm not going to do any damage. There, so each focusing screen, again I've put some photos up for you to have a look at, but each focusing screen has a tab on the end, and when you bought a new one, it came in a beautiful box with a set of purpose-made tweezers, I guess you'd say, to enable you to grip onto this and change it without getting any greasy finger marks on the screen itself, because that would be disastrous. So there we are. That's how Mytani got around offering interchangeable focusing screens without having to have a removable pentaprism. And we'll just pop this back in, get it the right way round. There we go, and clip it in. Like so. Hopefully no damage done. But that's a pretty ingenious way of offering interchangeable focusing screens. Why would you want to interchange focusing screens? Well, some people get on better with a split image rangefinder, some people get on better with a microprism, and some people, if they're using this with a microscope, and microscope adapters were available, would be better off using it with a simple ground glass screen. So that's why it's important. It was important for Olympus to offer that facility. A lot of these were used for microscopy, so they would have used the microscope adapter L to actually couple it up to whatever microscope the laboratory was using. Coming on from that, because Olympus had such a strong relationship with the medical side of things, with microscopes and things like that, they were also very keen to offer a comprehensive flash system for this. Now, the basic unit was the little T20, which was a hot shoe mounted flash, no bounce facility, relatively powerful. I think the guide number was 20. That's how they used to designate strobes and flash guns in those days. But no bounce facility, so you could fit it to the hot shoe, no problem. You could use an extension lead and fire it from off the camera, but it was intended to be used on the actual hot shoe. They also produced a more powerful one, the T32, which did have bounce flash facility, and they also provided the power grip, and as well as that, if you were into macro, they offered the T28, which was a ring that clamped around the lens, and it came with two separate small flash heads on either side of the lens, so that you could modify the light when you were doing macro work. If you wanted more straightforward full frontal lighting, they produced the T10 ring flash, and of course that would have been useful for medical photographs as well, you know, dentistry, that kind of thing. So the OM-1, mine is the OM-1N MD. The N was simply the the last iteration of the OM-1, and the only difference was the fact that it gave you that flash ready light in the viewfinder. Oh, one other thing it gave, I do beg your pardon, with the OM-1N, if you fitted an electronic flash unit to the camera, the T20 or the T32, it would automatically sync at X speeds, irrespective of whether you had this selector on the front set to bulbs. Needless to say, it was also supplied with a huge range of lenses, many of which are still available on the used market. A great little camera. My particular example, I'm just going to open the back and see what falls out. When I say what falls out, the light traps are going to need replacing in this. You can get replacement seals off the internet, and all they are very, very thin strips of foam rubber that seat in here on the end of the camera here, and mine looks to have pretty much disintegrated there. but they are freely available. So if I want to put a film through this, I'm going to have to invest in those. The back is removable. Just let me turn it round so I can do it properly. There we go. Removable back, and your conventional cloth focal plane shutter. Now, for those of you that have never used a film SLR in the past, I can honestly tell you that using a mechanical camera like this is such a joy. Just the action of winding your film on and releasing the shutter, it gives me a great deal of pleasure, and it's something that you do not get any longer with digital cameras of any description, sadly. So there we are. That's my appraisal of the lovely Olympus OM-1. And I got this complete with lens and ever-ready case for £70, which I think is an absolute steal because it's as near mint as any that I've ever seen. The problem with the ever-ready case, it's only fit for the bin. I'll just grab it and show you. I told you it was rough. It has basically disintegrated, and there are more bits coming off it than I care to even tell you about. So this is going to go in the bin, sadly, as is the neck strap, which is more like a piece of wire rather than a flexible camera strap. It's pretty much rigid, so I'm afraid those definitely are on their way out as soon as I've finished this video. I hope you enjoyed it. For those of you considering getting a 35mm film SLR, you know, I can only recommend the OM-1 in terms of its size. You'll have seen some comparisons already between it and the competition of the time. That's it for this video. Enjoy your photography, whether you're shooting film or digital, and I'll see you all very soon for another one. Bye bye for now.